A wedding feast. The hall erupts with laughter and music. Lords raise their cups in celebration. A pregnant woman smiles at her husband, the king in the north. Then the musicians begin playing a different song. The Rains of Castamere. The bride's smile falters. She knows that melody. Everyone from Westeros knows that melody. It means one thing. The Lannisters send their regards. Crossbows emerge from the balconies. Doors slam shut and lock. The music continues as the slaughter begins. A king dies watching his pregnant wife stabbed in the belly. His mother's throat opens like a red smile. 3,000 men butchered outside in their tents. By dawn, an entire rebellion ends not on the battlefield, but at a dinner table. This was not the first time that song played over dying screams. 40 years earlier, deep underground in the fortress of Castamere, a proud lord hears rushing water echoing through stone tunnels. He realizes too late what is happening. A river has been diverted into the mines. The water rises, level by level. Families scramble upward through the darkness, but there is nowhere to go. Every exit sealed. An entire house drowns together. Men, women, children. The impregnable fortress becomes their tomb. One 19-year-old boy did this. His message to Westeros, carved in corpses and sung by musicians for decades: never cross House Lannister. Years later, a great city opens its gates to welcome an army flying lion banners. The Mad King believes his old friend has come to save him. Within hours, the streets run red. Soldiers pour through like a crimson flood. In the royal chambers, a 4-year-old princess is stabbed 50 times. A baby's skull is smashed against a wall. Their mother raped and murdered. The bodies wrapped in red cloaks and dumped at the feet of the new king. Proof of loyalty. 3 massacres, 3 kings controlled, 1 man behind it all. He never wore a crown. He never needed to. His name was enough. Tywin Lannister. And for 40 years, he was the most powerful man in Westeros. But power built on blood has a price, and that price would be paid on a privy with 2 crossbow bolts by the son he despised most. Tonight you will learn how one man ruled 3 kings, how he built an empire on fear, how that empire died with him, the secret behind the most ruthless leader Westeros ever knew. This is the story of Tywin Lannister, the man who proved that the person sitting on the throne matters far less than the person standing behind it. Hey guys, tonight we dive into the dark legacy of the man who truly ruled the 7 kingdoms. From the drowning of Castamere to the Red Wedding, from the sack of King's Landing to his own shocking death. This is a story of calculated brutality, strategic genius, and the ultimate price of absolute power. So, before we begin, take a moment to like this video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy the content I create. Let me know in the comments where you are listening from and what time it is there. I always love seeing who joins us from around the world. Now, get comfortable, dim the lights, settle into your blanket, and let's journey into the legend of the man who made kings tremble. Our story spans 4 decades of Westeros history, from 260 to 300 years after Aegon's conquest. An era of chaos. An age when mad kings burned people alive, boy kings threw tantrums on the Iron Throne, and the realm tore itself apart in civil war. Through it all, one constant remained. One man who never wore a crown but controlled everyone who did. Tywin Lannister, Lord of Casterly Rock, Warden of the West, Hand of the King, to 3 different monarchs, born in the year 234, died in 300, a man who cast a shadow across half a century. Imagine him, tall and broad-shouldered, but lean. His head shaved completely bald by choice, because balding was weakness, and Tywin Lannister showed no weakness. Golden side whiskers framing a face carved from stone, pale green eyes that missed nothing. a voice that never rose but commanded absolute obedience. They said he never smiled, not once, after the day his wife died giving birth to his third child. He ruled from Castamere Rock, that massive fortress carved into living rock on the western coast, a castle where gold veins run through the very stone of the walls, where every chamber echoes with the weight of power and calculation, where maps cover tables in war rooms and every decision is measured against one single question: what serves House Lannister? In King's Landing, 300 miles to the east, sits the Red Keep and the Iron Throne. This is where kings rule in name. But in the Tower of the Hand, in those same halls, real power resides. And for decades, Tywin Lannister made that tower his true seat of authority. He had allies, though few he trusted. His younger brother Kevin, loyal and competent, the only person Tywin relied upon without question. His sharp-minded sister Jenna, who understood him better than anyone, and he had 3 children, Cersei and Jaime, the Golden Twins born in 266, and Tyrion, the dwarf born in 273, the son whose birth killed Tywin's beloved wife Joanna. That death broke something in Tywin Lannister. The only woman who ever made him human, gone. They said the best part of him died with her. What remained was pure calculation, ruthless efficiency, and an obsession with one singular goal: legacy, the Lannister name, erasing the stain his weak father Tytos had left on their house, transforming the Lannisters from a joke into the most feared family in the 7 kingdoms, ensuring their dominance would last for generations. Control over chaos, reputation over mercy, the family name above everything, even above family itself. This is his story, the story of how one man seized power, maintained it through fear, and watched it crumble the moment he died. To understand how Tywin Lannister became the most feared man in Westeros, you need to understand what he witnessed as a boy. You need to see what his father was. Tytos Lannister was by all accounts a kind man, generous, trusting, everything a great lord should never be. He inherited Castamere Rock and with it the responsibility of ruling the richest and most powerful region in the 7 kingdoms. He had gold beyond measure, armies at his command, and a legacy stretching back thousands of years, and he squandered it all through weakness. Tytos lent gold to anyone who asked. Lords throughout Westeros came to Castamere Rock with their hands out and their mouths full of promises. Tytos opened his vaults. He trusted their word. He believed in the honor of men. Within years the Westerlands were owed fortunes that would never be repaid. When Tytos sent demands for payment, lords laughed. Some sent insults instead of gold. Others simply ignored him. Word spread. The great House Lannister, richer than the king himself, had become a joke. A traveling singer composed a ballad mocking the toothless lion who gave away his gold and expected gratitude in return. That song was performed in taverns across the realm. Men drank and laughed while singing about Lannister weakness. Young Tywin heard that song. He was perhaps 10 years old, standing in the halls of Castamere Rock while a visiting bard performed it. He watched his father smile awkwardly, pretending not to understand the mockery. He saw the visiting lords exchange knowing glances. That moment burned itself into his memory. But the humiliation went deeper than unpaid debts and cruel songs. After Tywin's mother died, his father took a mistress, not a noble woman, not even a knight's daughter, the daughter of a candlemaker from Lannisport, a girl young enough to be Tyce's daughter, and Tyces did not keep her hidden away, as custom demanded. He brought her into Castamere Rock itself. She wore the late Lady Lannister's jewelry. She dressed in gowns that had belonged to Tywin's mother. She dismissed servants and gave orders as if she were the Lady of Castamere Rock. The staff obeyed because Lord Tysus allowed it. He was too weak, too besotted, too afraid of confrontation to stop her. Tywin watched this too, his mother's memory desecrated, his family's dignity trampled, and his father doing nothing. The final straw came from House Rain and House Tarbeck, two of the most powerful bannermen sworn to Casterly Rock. For generations these houses had served the Lannisters faithfully, but under Tystus they saw opportunity in weakness. Roger Rain was called the Red Lion of Castamere. He ruled from an underground fortress carved into the mines, 3 levels deep, considered completely impregnable. He was wealthy, ambitious, and utterly contemptuous of Tywin Lannister. When Tywin demanded repayment of loans, Roger Rain simply refused, not with excuses, with open defiance. Lady Ellen Tarbeck was equally bold. When Tywin sent demands, she responded by taking 3 Lannister men hostage. She held them in her castle and dared Tywin to do something about it. There are stories, whispered but never confirmed, of a feast where Roger Rain led Lord Tywin around the hall on a rope, parading him like a performing animal. Whether true or exaggerated, the story spread, and in Westeros, perception is reality. The realm believed Tywin Lannister could be humiliated with impunity. Tywin was 19 years old when the Rain and Tarbeck rebellion began in earnest. Both houses had decided they no longer needed to pretend obedience. They would carve out their own power, perhaps even challenge Casterly Rock itself. Tywin predictably wanted to negotiate. He sent envoys. He offered compromises. He suggested they could work through their differences peacefully, as civilized men should. Tywin looked at his father and saw everything he would never allow himself to become. He saw a man more concerned with being liked than being feared, a man who mistook mercy for strength and kindness for wisdom, a man whose weakness invited predators. The young Tywin went to his father and said simply that he would handle the Rains and the Tarbecks. Tywin protested weakly. These were bannermen, family. In a sense, they could still be reasoned with. Tywin's response has been lost to history, but his actions spoke clearly enough. He gathered the Lannister forces. He called the banners, and he made a decision that would echo through 4 decades of Westeros history. Mercy was weakness. Weakness invited destruction. Therefore, mercy would have no place in his rule. If the Rainers and Tarbecks wanted to test Lannister power, he would give them a lesson the realm would never forget. He was going to make an example so complete, so brutal, so utterly final, that no one would ever dare mock a Lannister again. The boy who watched his father humiliated was about to become the man all Westeros feared. The Tarbecks fell first. Tywin marched his forces to Tarbeck Hall with overwhelming strength. No envoys, no negotiations, no warnings beyond what had already been ignored. He simply arrived and laid siege. Lady Ellen Tarbeck, who had mocked the Lannisters for so long, who had taken hostages and laughed at demands for their return, now found herself trapped behind her own walls. She had expected the young lord to behave like his father. She expected compromise and lengthy negotiations while she bargained for better terms. Instead, she got systematic destruction. Lannister forces bombarded the castle walls with siege engines. Stone by stone, the defenses crumbled. When breaches opened, soldiers poured through. The defenders fought, certainly. They were not cowards. But they were outnumbered and facing an enemy that had been ordered to show no mercy whatsoever. By dawn, Tarbeck Hall was burning. Every member of House Tarbeck lay dead in the rubble. Lady Ellen died defiant to the end, they say. But defiance means nothing when your house is extinct. The castle was torn down, the land seized, and the Tarbeck name wiped from history. One house destroyed, one to go. House Rain heard the news and retreated to Castamere, their ancestral fortress. This was the move Roger Rain had been planning all along. Let the boy lord throw his tantrum at Tarbeck Hall. Castamere was different. Castamere was impregnable. The fortress of Castamere was not a traditional castle. It had been built down into the old mines, 3 levels carved deep into the earth. The halls were stone. The walls were living rock. There were supplies for months, maybe years. There were only a few entrances, all easily defended. An enemy could batter at the doors forever and achieve nothing. Roger Rain gathered his entire family inside. Men, women, children, everyone. He sealed the entrances and waited for Tywin to break himself against an impossible siege. Eventually the young lord would have to give up. Eventually he would have to negotiate, and House Rain would emerge victorious, having proven that Lannister power could be resisted. Tywin Lannister arrived at Castamere with his army and studied the situation. His commanders likely suggested a lengthy siege, starve them out, wait months or years if necessary. Eventually, they would have to emerge or die of hunger. Tywin looked at the sealed fortress and said something that has echoed through history in various forms. "I will not dig them out. I will drown them in." He brought in engineers, not soldiers, engineers. They studied the nearby streams and rivers. They calculated gradients and water flow, and then they went to work. Within days, they had diverted a stream. The water that once flowed past Castamere now flowed into it, through the mine entrances, down into the carved halls, into the impregnable fortress, where House Rain waited in confidence. The first level flooded slowly. Ankle-deep water at first, hardly concerning. These were mines. After all, some water seepage was normal. But the water kept rising, shin-deep, knee-deep, waist-deep. By the time they realized what was happening, it was too late. The entrances were underwater, the passages filling. They tried to block the flow, but you cannot block a river with desperation and furniture. The water rose inexorably. Families scrambled upward to the second level, then the third. But there is nowhere to run when the flood comes from below, and the only exits are sealed or submerged. They were trapped in their impregnable fortress, and that fortress had become their tomb. The screaming echoed through stone tunnels as the water climbed higher. Children crying, mothers wailing, men shouting orders that meant nothing. Roger Rain, the proud Red Lion who had mocked Tywin Lannister, died knowing his arrogance had drowned his entire bloodline. By morning, Castamere was silent. The water filled every hall, every chamber, every tunnel. Not a single member of House Rain survived. Not one. Tywin ordered the entrances sealed permanently. Let Castamere remain flooded. Let it stand as a monument to what happens when bannermen forget their place. And then came the song. Some musician, name lost to time, composed a ballad about the destruction of House Rain, the Rains of Castamere. It told the story of a proud lord who challenged a lion and drowned for his arrogance. The lyrics were haunting, the melody beautiful and terrible. And now the rains weep over his hall, with no one there to hear. The song spread across Westeros like wildfire. Within months every tavern and hall knew it. But this was not a song sung for entertainment. This was a warning. When you heard the Rains of Castamere, you remembered what the Lannisters did to Houses Rain and Tarbeck. You remembered that defiance equals extinction. For 40 years, that song would haunt Westeros. It would be played at the Red Wedding just before the slaughter began. It would be sung in taverns when men wanted to invoke fear. It became synonymous with Lannister power and the price of crossing them. The realm's reaction was immediate. Every lord who owed the Lannisters money suddenly found ways to repay their debts. Every bannerman who had considered defiance reconsidered. Lords who had laughed at Tywin Lannister now spoke of his son in hushed, fearful tones. Tywin Lannister was 19 years old, and overnight he had transformed House Lannister from a laughingstock into the most feared name in the Seven Kingdoms. His father Titus tried to speak with him about what had happened, about the women and children who had drowned in Castamere, about the brutality of it all. Tywin simply looked at his father and said they would never discuss it again. Titus Lannister died a few years later, in 267, his heart giving out as he climbed stairs to his bedchamber. Some say he died of a broken heart, unable to reconcile the son he raised with the man who drowned an entire house without hesitation. Tywin inherited Casterly Rock officially, though he had been its true lord since Castamere. He was 33 years old and already legendary. He had learned the fundamental lesson that would guide him for the next 4 decades. Fear lasts longer than love. Brutality, properly applied, ends wars before they begin, and mercy is a luxury only weak men can afford. The boy who watched his father humiliated had become the man who made kings nervous, and his rise to power was only beginning. In 262, King Jaehaerys II died after a brief and unremarkable reign. His son Aerys ascended to the Iron Throne as Aerys II, and one of his first acts as king was to name a new hand. He chose his childhood friend, Tywin Lannister, the man who had drowned House Rain, the lord who had proven that ruthless efficiency could restore a great house from mockery to dominance. Tywin was 20 years old, making him the youngest hand of the king in the history of the 7 kingdoms. It was a brilliant choice. For about 15 years, Tywin moved to King's Landing and took up residence in the Tower of the Hand. He brought with him the same cold calculation that had served him at Casterly Rock. The realm was in debt. The roads were poorly maintained. Trade was sluggish. Justice was inconsistent. King Jaehaerys had been a decent man, but an uninspired administrator. Tywin set to work with characteristic efficiency. First, he addressed the crown's debts. The Iron Throne owed considerable sums to the Iron Bank of Braavos, that ancient institution that never forgives and never forgets unpaid loans. Tywin paid them in full, using gold from Casterly Rock, his own gold from his own mines, to restore the crown's credit. The Iron Bank was satisfied. More importantly, they were impressed. Next came infrastructure. Roads were repaired and expanded. Ports were improved. Trade routes were secured and protected. Merchants who had been strangled by inconsistent tariffs suddenly found themselves able to conduct business efficiently. Money flowed into the royal treasury. The realm prospered. Tywin reformed the justice system, making punishment swift and severe. Crime dropped dramatically. Criminals learned that under Tywin Lannister's administration, there would be no lengthy appeals, no political favors, no escape through connections. You committed a crime. You faced immediate consequences. He organized the military more effectively. Supply lines were optimized. Standing forces were maintained at strategic locations. The 7 kingdoms had not been this stable or well governed in living memory. And through it all, King Aerys sat on the Iron Throne and took credit for everything. This was the arrangement. Andres would hold court, receive visitors, make grand pronouncements. Tywin would actually run the kingdom. It should have worked. In many ways, it did work. But there was a problem growing beneath the surface. People noticed who really held power. Visiting lords would arrive at the Red Keep and pay their respects to the king, as protocol demanded. But then they would go to the Tower of the Hand to conduct actual business. When important decisions needed to be made, they sought Tywin, not Aerys. The king's small council meetings were formalities. Real governance happened in Tywin's chambers. Whispers spread throughout the realm. The king is young and easily influenced. The Hand is the one truly ruling. Tywin Lannister runs the 7 kingdoms while Aerys plays at being king. These whispers eventually reached Aerys himself, and like poison dripped slowly into wine, they began to change him. Around 268, after a visit to Lannisport, where the crowds cheered more loudly for Tywin than for their king. Aerys returned to King's Landing in a foul mood. He began undermining his hand's decisions. When Tywin proposed a new master-at-arms for the Red Keep, Aerys appointed someone else entirely. When disputes arose between lords, Aerys would side against Tywin's recommendations purely out of spite. He would implement unpopular policies, then publicly blame them on his hand. When merchants complained about increased port fees, Aerys told them his hand had insisted on the change over royal objections. Then he would reverse the decision, making himself look merciful while Tywin appeared grasping and cruel. The friendship they once shared curdled into resentment and paranoia. In 272, at a tournament celebrating some anniversary or another, Aerys took liberties with Tywin's wife Joanna. The exact nature of what happened has never been made fully clear, but whatever occurred was public enough to humiliate Tywin and crude enough to be remembered decades later. Tywin offered his resignation immediately. Aerys refused to accept it. He wanted Tywin to stay, to continue doing the actual work of governance, but he also wanted to humiliate him. He wanted the competence without giving the respect. Then came 273, and tragedy struck in a way that changed Tywin forever. Joanna Lannister went into labor with their third child. The birth was difficult. Complications arose. When it was over, Joanna was dead, and a dwarf infant lay crying in her place. They named him Tyrion. Tywin had loved his wife. It was perhaps the only time in his life he had allowed himself genuine affection for another person. She had softened his edges, reminded him that life contained more than strategy and power. People said that when Joanna died, the best part of Tywin died with her. What remained was pure calculation, pure ruthlessness, pure obsession with legacy and power. He never remarried. He never smiled again. And he blamed Tyrion, the dwarf who killed his mother being born, for stealing the one human connection he had valued. Aerys, with his growing madness and cruelty, mocked the child openly. He would make jokes about the dwarf baby, about monsters, about the gods punishing Tywin for his pride. Each joke was another knife in whatever remained of their friendship. The final years of Tywin's service were marked by increasing tension. In 276, Tywin proposed a marriage between his daughter Cersei and Prince Rhaegar, Aerys's eldest son and heir. It would have been a brilliant match, uniting the wealthiest house in Westeros with the royal family. Aerys rejected the proposal with an insult that became famous. "You are my most able servant, Tywin. But a man does not marry his heir to his servant's daughter." Servant, after 20 years of service, after rebuilding the realm's prosperity, after making Aerys' reign successful through sheer administrative brilliance, Tywin was called a servant. The friendship was officially dead. Only duty remained, and even that was fraying. The final break came in 281 at the tournament at Harrenhal. A position had opened in the Kingsguard, and Aerys announced that Sir Jaime Lannister, Tywin's eldest son and favored heir, would fill it. Jaime was 15 years old, newly knighted, and being granted what appeared to be a tremendous honor. But everyone understood what it really meant. Kingsguard take vows of celibacy. They cannot marry. They cannot inherit lands or titles. By appointing Jaime, Aerys had effectively stolen Tywin's heir. Tyrion, the dwarf son Tywin despised, was now heir to Casterly Rock, and Jaime would remain in King's Landing, a permanent hostage for Tywin's good behavior. Tywin stood in that hall at Harrenhal and thanked the king for honoring his son. He smiled, he said all the appropriate words, and then he resigned as Hand of the King. Not dramatically, not with accusations or recriminations. He simply stated that he would be returning to Casterly Rock to attend to his duties as Lord of the West. After 20 years, he walked away from power. Aerys let him go, believing he had won, believing he had finally put his ambitious servant in his place, believing he could rule successfully. without Tywin Lannister. Within 2 years, Robert's rebellion would begin. Within 3 years, Aerys would be dead, and Tywin would prove that leaving power does not mean losing it. The game was not over. It was just entering a new phase. Robert's rebellion began in 282 with fire and blood. The Mad King burned Lord Rickard Stark alive while forcing his son Brandon to watch, then strangled Brandon with a device designed to make him kill himself trying to save his father. When Aerys demanded that Jon Arryn deliver the heads of his 2 wards, Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark, the Lord of the Eyrie, refused. Instead, he raised his banners in open revolt. The realm split. Some houses supported the rebellion. Others remained loyal to the crown. And Tywin Lannister sat in Casterly Rock with the largest army in Westeros and did absolutely nothing. Both sides sent ravens. Robert's forces begged for Lannister support, promising rewards and positions in a new government. Andry sent increasingly desperate demands for his former hand to honor his oaths and defend the crown. Tywin ignored them all. He was playing a different game entirely. Why commit to a side when you can wait to see which side wins? Why risk Lannister lives and gold when you can let others bleed themselves dry fighting, then sweep in at the end and claim victory? So Tywin waited. He gathered his forces but gave no orders to march. He made no declarations of loyalty to either cause. He simply watched from the west while the realm tore itself apart. The war raged for over a year. Battles were won and lost. Lords died. Armies marched across the kingdoms, leaving devastation in their wake, and still Tywin waited. Then came the Battle of the Trident in 283. Robert Baratheon faced Prince Rhaegar Targaryen in single combat on that battlefield. Robert's warhammer caved in the prince's breastplate, and rubies from Rhaegar's armor scattered into the river water like drops of blood. The heir to the Iron Throne died face down in the current. The royal army shattered. Survivors fled back toward King's Landing in complete disarray. The rebellion had won. The Targaryen cause was finished. Now Tywin moved. He gathered 12,000 men and marched them toward King's Landing at speed. He sent a raven ahead, announcing that he was coming to defend his king against the rebels. Lord Tywin Lannister, ever loyal, rushing to save Aerys in his hour of need. Inside the Red Keep, the Mad King's advisors were divided. Lord Varys, the Master of Whispers, counseled caution. Do not trust him. This is Tywin Lannister we are talking about. He does not defend losing causes. It is a trap. But Grand Maester Pycelle argued otherwise. Pycelle had been appointed on Tywin's recommendation years earlier and remained loyal to House Lannister. Though Aerys did not know this, the Grand Maester insisted that Tywin was honorable, that he would never betray his king, that they desperately needed those 12,000 soldiers. Even Jaime Lannister, standing in his white Kingsguard cloak, tried to warn Aerys. He knew his father. Tywin never backed a losing side. This was a betrayal in the making. But Aerys was desperate, paranoid, and not thinking clearly. He had already lost his son and heir. His armies were defeated. The rebels were days away from reaching the capital. He needed those Lannister forces. He wanted to believe his old friend had remained loyal. So Aerys ordered the gates opened. The Lannister army marched into King's Landing unopposed, and the nightmare began immediately. There was no orderly defensive positioning, no coordination with the city guard. Instead, Tywin's soldiers spread through the streets like a crimson plague. They were not there to defend the city. They were there to sack it. Systematic slaughter followed. Anyone who resisted was cut down. Shops were looted. Buildings were burned. The city descended into chaos as 12,000 armed men were unleashed with no restraint whatsoever. This was not war. This was calculated brutality designed to prove beyond any doubt that the Lannisters now served Robert Baratheon. While the city burned, Tywin sent two of his most brutal men on a special mission. Ser Gregor Clegane, a massive knight known for his size and cruelty, and Ser Amory Loch, another man comfortable with ugly work. Their orders were specific. Find the royal children, kill them, make it undeniable. They went to the royal apartments where Princess Aelia Martell of Dorne had taken refuge with her two children. Rhaenys was 4 years old. Aegon was still an infant. What happened next was so brutal that even hardened warriors found it difficult to stomach. Gregor Clegane dragged Rhaenys out from under a bed where she had been hiding. He stabbed her over 50 times. Not once, not twice, 50 times. The excessive violence was deliberate. This was not a clean execution. This was a message written in a child's blood. Then he turned to Princess Aelia. She was holding her infant son, begging for mercy. There was none. Gregor raped her while still covered in her daughter's blood. Then he took the baby from her arms, smashed his head against a wall, and killed Aelia as well. Sir Amory helped dispose of the bodies. They wrapped the corpses in crimson Lannister cloaks, so there would be no mistaking who had done this. Then they carried them through the Red Keep and presented them to Tywin. Meanwhile, in the throne room, Aerys finally understood what was happening. He screamed at Jaime to bring him Tywin's head. He commanded his pyromancer, Rossart, to ignite the wildfire caches hidden throughout the city. Burn them all. If I cannot rule, no one will. Jaime Lannister faced an impossible choice. He could obey his king's command and watch 1,000,000 people burn alive, or he could break the most sacred oath a knight can take. He chose the 1,000,000 people. Jaime stabbed Aerys in the back, then slit his throat. He killed Rossars to prevent the wildfire plot. And when Eddard Stark arrived to find the throne room, Jaime was sitting on the Iron Throne itself, blood on his sword, his white cloak stained red. From that day forward, he would be known as the Kingslayer, the knight who murdered his king. History would remember him as an oathbreaker, though he had actually saved the city. Tywin met Robert Baratheon and Eddard Stark at the gates with his gift. The wrapped bodies of Aelia Martell and her children, proof of Lannister loyalty to the new regime. Ned Stark was horrified. These were children, an infant and a 4-year-old girl, murdered in the most brutal fashion imaginable. He confronted Tywin directly about the unnecessary cruelty. Tywin's response was characteristically cold, Dragonspawn. If Robert wanted to secure his throne, potential heirs to the old dynasty could not be allowed to survive. Better to eliminate them now than fight another rebellion in 20 years. Robert Baratheon, ever the pragmatist, accepted this logic. He was furious about how it was done. Certainly, the excessive brutality was distasteful. But strategically, Tywin was right. Living Targaryen heirs were a threat to his rule. Jon Arryn, who had started the rebellion by refusing to kill his wards, worked to hold the alliance together despite Ned's disgust. A compromise was reached. Robert would take the throne. He would marry Cersei Lannister, binding House Lannister to the new royal family. The past would be buried, if not forgiven. And so it was settled. Robert became king. Cersei became queen. Within a year, she gave birth to a son. They named Joffrey, then a daughter, Myrcella, then another son, Tommen. Tywin returned to Casterly Rock, having no need for an official position. His daughter was queen. His blood would sit on the Iron Throne. Real power did not require a title. But the sack of King's Landing left wounds that would never heal. In Dorne, Oberyn Martell swore eternal vengeance for his murdered sister and her children. Prince Doran Martell, quieter but no less determined, began planning a revenge that would take decades to unfold. The brutality that secured Lannister power had also created enemies who would never forget and never forgive. The seeds of future conflicts were planted in the blood of children. Tywin had proven once again that he would do absolutely anything to advance his family's position. Castamere had taught Westeros to fear the Lannisters. The sack of King's Landing reminded them why. For 15 years, there was relative peace. Robert Baratheon ruled as king with Jon Arryn as his hand. Tywin remained at Casterly Rock, ruling the Westerlands while his daughter sat beside Robert on the Iron Throne. It was not the reign Tywin might have designed, but it served Lannister interests well enough. Then Jon Arryn died suddenly in 298, poisoned by his own wife, though this would not be discovered for years. Robert made the long journey north to Winterfell and convinced his old friend Eddard Stark to become the new hand of the king. Ned arrived in King's Landing and began investigating the circumstances around Jon Arryn's death. What he discovered would destroy everything. Joffrey, Myrcella, and Tommen were not Robert's children. They were the products of an incestuous relationship between Cersei and Jaime Lannister. The children who would inherit the throne had no Baratheon blood whatsoever. Before Ned could act on this information, Robert died from wounds suffered during a hunting accident that was not quite as accidental as it appeared. Joffrey was crowned king. When Ned tried to reveal the truth about Joffrey's parentage, he was arrested for treason. And then Joffrey, with the impulsive cruelty that would define his reign, ordered Ned Stark's execution against everyone's advice. The moment that sword took Ned's head, the realm exploded into war. Robb Stark was declared king in the north. Stannis Baratheon claimed the throne based on Joffrey's illegitimacy. Renly Baratheon, Robert's youngest brother, also declared himself king with the backing of the powerful Tyrell family. Balon Greyjoy crowned himself king of the Iron Islands, 5 kings fighting for supremacy, the realm burning. Tywin had been in Casterly Rock when the war began, but he moved quickly. He raised Lannister armies and marched east. His strategy was twofold. Send Jaime with half the forces to besiege Riverrun, home of Catelyn Stark's family. Take the other half himself, and position them to face the main northern army. The initial battles did not go well for the Lannisters. Robb Stark proved to be a brilliant tactical commander despite his youth. At the Battle of Whispering Wood, Robb captured Jaime Lannister himself and scattered his army. It was a devastating blow. But Tywin understood something that Robb did not. Tactics win battles, strategy wins wars, and Tywin was a strategic genius. He established his base of operations at Harrenhal, the massive ruined castle in the Riverlands. From there he began orchestrating a campaign that had nothing to do with battlefield victories. He sent letters. He made quiet offers. He identified which of Robb's bannermen might be persuaded to change sides. The war reached a critical point at the Battle of the Blackwater in 299. Stannis Baratheon sailed his fleet to King's Landing and nearly took the city. Joffrey was preparing to flee. The defenses were collapsing. Tyrion Lannister, who had been serving as hand in Tywin's absence, led a desperate defense but was gravely wounded in the fighting. Then Tywin arrived with a massive army, having formed a secret alliance with House Tyrell. The combined Lannister and Tyrell forces smashed Stannis' army and saved the capital. Tywin rode his horse directly into the throne room to accept the king's gratitude. Joffrey named him savior of the city and reaffirmed him as hand of the king. The real power had returned to King's Landing. Immediately, Tywin began restructuring the government. Every small council meeting was dominated by his presence. When Joffrey threw tantrums, Tywin stared him down with such cold authority that even the boy king learned to be silent. He arranged for Joffrey to marry Margaery Tyrell, securing the vital alliance with Highgarden. He made Tyrion master of coin despite his son's crucial role in defending the city. He even ordered Cersei to marry Loras Tyrell, though she resisted furiously. Everything was being arranged to Tywin's specifications, except for one problem. Robb Stark was still winning battles. The young wolf was undefeated in the field. As long as the North remained in rebellion, the war could not truly be won. So Tywin changed the rules of the game entirely. He began secret negotiations with two of Robb's bannermen, Lord Walder Frey, an ancient and bitter man who controlled the Twins, a strategically vital crossing. Frey had been insulted when Robb broke a marriage pact to marry someone else. He wanted revenge. And Lord Roose Bolton, the pale and calculating lord of the Dreadfort. Bolton was ambitious and had come to believe that Robb's cause was ultimately doomed. He wanted to be on the winning side. Tywin made them both offers they found irresistible. In exchange for betraying Robb Stark, they would receive titles, lands, and power in the new order. All they had to do was arrange for Robb to die. The plan came together at the Twins. Edmure Tully, Catelyn Stark's brother, was to marry one of Walder Frey's many daughters. Robb would attend as an honored guest. He would bring his wife, his mother, and his closest commanders. They would celebrate the wedding, and guest right that most sacred of Westerosi customs would protect them. Guest right meant that once you had eaten bread and salt in a man's home, you were under his protection. To harm a guest was among the most heinous crimes imaginable. The gods themselves would curse such a violation. Walder Frey and Roose Bolton decided they could live with divine displeasure. The wedding feast proceeded normally at first. Food was served. Wine flowed. Musicians played. Then, as the evening wore on, the musicians began a new song, the Rains of Castamere. Catelyn Stark heard those opening notes and felt ice in her veins. She looked at Roose Bolton and saw him wearing chainmail beneath his clothes. She understood instantly what was about to happen. She tried to warn Robb. She grabbed Walder Frey's wife as a hostage, but it was far too late. The musicians dropped their instruments and drew crossbows. The doors slammed shut and barred. Frey soldiers appeared from every entrance with weapons drawn, and the slaughter began. Robb's pregnant wife Talisa was stabbed repeatedly in her belly, killing both her and the child she carried. Robb himself took multiple crossbow bolts while desperately trying to reach his mother. Catelyn, holding a knife to Lady Frey's throat, begged for her son's life. She was ignored. Roose Bolton walked up to the dying Robb Stark and drove a dagger into his heart. Jaime Lannister sends his regards. Outside, the Northern Army was being massacred in their tents. 3,000 men cut down in a coordinated assault. Robb's direwolf Greywind was killed, and later, in a final act of desecration, his head was sewn onto Robb's corpse. By dawn, the king in the north was dead. His army was destroyed. The Northern Rebellion was finished. When word reached King's Landing, Tyrion immediately knew his father had orchestrated it. He confronted Tywin about violating guest right, about the sheer horror of what had been done. Tywin's response has become famous. Explain to me why it is more noble to kill 10,000 men in battle than a dozen at dinner. I won the war without losing a single Lannister soldier. The Freys and Boltons will take the blame, but we achieved the objective. It was strategic genius and moral monstrosity combined. Tywin had ended the rebellion through treachery rather than warfare. He had saved countless lives by taking a few, and he had proven once again that he would do absolutely anything to win. The realm was horrified. Guest right was sacred. What the Freys had done, what Tywin had ordered, was an unforgivable violation of the most fundamental laws of hospitality and honor. But the realm was also at peace. The rebellions were crushed. Only Stannis remained in opposition, and he was far away with a diminished force. The Lannisters and Tyrells controlled the throne. Tywin Lannister, through calculated brutality and strategic brilliance, had won. He ruled through the third king, and his position seemed unshakable. The purple wedding took place on the first day of the year 300. Joffrey married Margaery Tyrell in a ceremony of unprecedented grandeur. It should have been Tywin's greatest triumph. The Lannister and Tyrell alliance was now sealed by marriage. The realm was at peace. His grandson sat securely on the Iron Throne. Everything Tywin had worked for had come to fruition. Then, during the wedding feast, Joffrey began choking. He clawed at his throat, his face turning purple, blood vessels bursting in his eyes. He died in his mother's arms, while the entire court watched in horror. Poison. Someone had poisoned the king. Cersei immediately accused Tyrion, who had been publicly humiliated by Joffrey moments before the death. Tyrion was arrested and thrown into a black cell. The dwarf son that Tywin had hated for 27 years was finally in a position where he could be eliminated legally. 8-year-old Tommen was crowned king. Sweet, gentle Tommen, who could barely make a decision without asking permission. The perfect puppet for Tywin to control. The third king that Tywin Lannister would rule through. Tyrion's trial was a masterpiece of orchestration. Every witness was coached. Every piece of evidence was carefully selected. And then came the moment that broke Tyrion completely. Shae took the stand. The woman Tyrion had loved. The woman he had tried to protect by sending away. She testified that Tyrion had planned the whole thing, that he had discussed murdering Joffrey, that he was a monster who wanted power for himself. What Tyrion did not know was that his father had found Shae and made her an offer: testify against Tyrion and be rewarded, refuse and face consequences. Shae, who came from nothing and understood survival, chose to survive. The trial was a formality. The verdict was predetermined. Tyrion was found guilty and sentenced to death. Tywin had finally won. The son he blamed for Joanna's death would be legally executed, and Tywin's hands would remain clean. But Jaime could not let his brother die. On the night before the execution, he freed Tyrion from his cell with help from Varys, the Master of Whispers, who had his own reasons for wanting Tyrion alive. The plan was simple: get Tyrion out of the Red Keep, onto a ship, and across the narrow sea to safety. Tyrion should have gone directly to the ship. Instead, he made a detour through the secret passages of the Red Keep. He wanted to see the Tower of the Hand one last time. He wanted to confront his father about the lies and the manipulation and the lifetime of hatred. When he entered his father's chambers, he found Shae in Tywin's bed. The woman who had testified against him, who had called him a monster in open court, was sleeping with his father. She was wearing the golden chain of linked hands that marked her as the Hand's property. The hypocrisy crashed over Tyrion like a wave. His father, who had lectured him endlessly about the family name and dignity and proper behavior. His father, who had forbidden him from bringing Shae to King's Landing. His father was sleeping with her. Tyrion strangled Shae with that golden chain. Then he took a crossbow from the wall and went to find Tywin. He discovered his father in the privy. The most powerful man in Westeros, the man who had controlled the realm for 4 decades, was sitting on a toilet, vulnerable and absurdly human. They talked. Tywin tried to use reason and manipulation one final time. "You are my son. You will not kill me. We can work through this. I can make arrangements for your escape. Just put down the crossbow." Then Tywin made a fatal mistake. He referred to Shae as that whore. Tyrion had warned him. He had explicitly told him not to use that word. But Tywin could not help himself. Even now, even with a crossbow aimed at his chest, he had to demonstrate his contempt. The first bolt took him in the stomach. Tywin looked down in complete shock. His own son had actually shot him. It seemed impossible. The second bolt killed him. Tywin Lannister died on a privy in the Tower of the Hand, shot by the son he had spent 27 years despising, the architect of empires, The man who had drowned House Rain and orchestrated the Red Wedding died in the most undignified manner imaginable. There is a certain poetry to it, the man who built everything on control and dignity, losing both in his final moment. Tyrion and Varys fled King's Landing that night, sailing across the narrow sea to Essos. Cersei became the head of House Lannister by default and immediately began making catastrophic decisions. The realm discovered almost instantly that Tywin had been the only competent Lannister. Cersei alienated allies, made paranoid choices, and armed the religious fanatics of the faith militant in a desperate attempt to maintain control. Kevan Lannister tried to stabilize the situation, but he was murdered by Varys within months. Without Tywin, everything fell apart with shocking speed. Tommen, sweet and weak, was completely overwhelmed by the chaos around him. When Cersei destroyed the Great Sept with wildfire, killing Margaery Tyrell and hundreds of others, Tommen walked to his window and stepped out. The third king that Tywin had controlled died by suicide. Cersei crowned herself the first queen regnant of the Seven Kingdoms. She had learned all the wrong lessons from her father. She understood brutality and ruthlessness, but none of the strategic brilliance that had made Tywin effective. Her reign was marked by paranoia, violence, and steadily increasing isolation. Jaime, who had spent his life trying to live up to his father's expectations, finally rejected everything Tywin stood for. He rode north to fight against the army of the dead, abandoning Cersei and choosing honor over family for the first time in his life. Within 4 years of Tywin's death, House Lannister had lost the Iron Throne, lost the Westerland's dominant position, and lost nearly all of its power. The empire that Tywin had built through calculated brutality collapsed the moment he was no longer there to maintain it. The legacy is complex and dark. Tywin had transformed House Lannister from a laughingstock under his father into the most powerful family in Westeros. He had proven that fear and ruthless efficiency could achieve what honor and mercy could not. He had ruled through 3 different kings across 4 decades, maintaining stability through sheer force of will. But he had also taught his children all the wrong lessons. Cersei learned cruelty without strategy. Jaime learned to compromise his honor so thoroughly that he became the Kingslayer. Tyrion learned that brilliance and competence meant nothing if you were born different. The methods that built Lannister power guaranteed its destruction. An empire founded on fear cannot survive the death of the feared. A dynasty built on brutality will be consumed by that same brutality. Tywin saved House Lannister from his father's weakness, but his own ruthlessness planted the seeds for its ultimate downfall. They still sing the Rains of Castamere in taverns across Westeros, but now it has a different meaning. It is not just a song about what happens when you cross the Lannisters. It is a song about what happens when you build everything on blood and fear. Eventually, those rains fall on your own hall. Tywin Lannister proved that one brilliant, ruthless man can control kingdoms. He also proved that such control is temporary, that such methods have costs, and that legacy means nothing if it dies with you. The man who ruled 3 kings ended his story on a privy with 2 crossbow bolts in his chest. The man who drowned House Rain watched his own house drown in the consequences of his choices. The man who claimed everything he did was for family destroyed that family through his methods. And in the end, the only Lannister who truly survived and mattered was Tyrion, the son Tywin hated most. The dwarf who killed him became hand to the king once more, learned from his father's mistakes, and chose mercy over cruelty. That might be the greatest irony of all. Tywin Lannister's true legacy was not his golden children, or his military victories, or his political brilliance. It was the son he despised teaching the realm a better way to rule. The lion's roar faded, the rains fell, and Westeros learned that fear is a poor foundation for lasting power.